Hello, more than a few folks wanted me to go over some simplex terminology regarding flash photography. If you know this stuff already, then obviously, it's, anyway, one of the most daunting things about photography is flash photography. It kind of amazes me that it's like the one thing that scares the hell out of people, not literally, but they're afraid to do it, and it is that invisible barrier that separates out a lot of really unique and professional looking photography from simplex, even though it could be award-winning work, separates out what could be an awesome shot from kind of a dull or blah shot. Going over some of the simple terminology, like speed light versus strobe. I mean, we've got changes in connotation versus denotation. I mean, some people refer to these as strobes as far as the denotation versus connotation. Like the large Einstein studio strobe up above me, now strobe has kind of been used in connotation to refer to larger studio lamps, but technically, of course, the term strobe is incorrect. Strobe refers to multiple flashes or firing of a speed light or a strobe in stroboscopic effect, but its connotation has shifted some, back from the 1920s to now we refer to a studio strobe, as a large beast that you generally don't pack around with you on location, although a lot of people do. And it's just a term referred to in reference to an electronic flash, but specifically, people have misunderstandings since strobe means more than one flash. And that actually goes on to another thing. We talk about stroboscopic effects. One person, more than a few people, actually, what is a stroboscopic effect? And actually, let me take my Nikon speed light and take it out of TTL mode and stick it in repeating mode. You have the ability with advanced speed light like this to change the number of cycles per firing, and also the rate at which it fires in hertz. Right now I've got it set for 1/8 at 2 hertz, and I'll give you an example. Now obviously, depending on what your shutter speed is set at, let me actually change the hertz. I'm going to change it down to 9 times, and then I'm going to change the hertz up to about 9. And let's say I've got a time exposure that I'm taking of, I don't know, half a second or something. Anyway, that is stroboscopic effect. It's great for capturing action, special effects. As long as the shutter is open, you set the cycle at which it fires and the number of times it fires. That's one of the great things about, obviously I'm all about buying cheaper speed lights. One of the great advantages of having a nice speed light like this is especially TTL flash metering, which means you're getting through the lens metering of the flash. That's actually another one of the questions that I was asked, is what does TTL mean? It means through the lens. It just means that the camera is making the flash exposure settings based upon the amount of light that's actually entering in through the lens. So this is great. Well, it's great and it's bad in that TTL flash photography is the flash photography what program mode is to your camera. It's kind of a lazy way. It is necessary for a lot of things, just as program mode is necessary for sports and action, where you just don't have time. Photojournalistic work, sports action, where metering isn't allowed. I mean, metering, you just don't have the ability due to time constraints, obviously. So that is what TTL flash metering is. As far as what is rear curtain sync, you have front curtain sync, but rear curtain sync. But I was specifically asked what rear curtain sync is. Say you have a 1/4 of a second and your shutter opens here. It is great for special effects and actually conveying compositionally the notion of action or motion in your shots. And you can just type in rear curtain sync shots on Google if you want to see some examples. Like you take a 1/2 of a second shot out in the street. It doesn't have to be on a tripod or a monopod. You have blur, and at the very last second, last fraction of a second of your shutter, let's say I got a 1/4 of a second. I mean, it can happen a 60th of a second, and it can happen over 2 seconds. I mean, there are plenty of handheld shots, like late at night in street photography, where there's some really beautiful shots that are taken at 3 or 4 second exposures with no monopod and no tripod. And what happens is that you'll actually see blur, and obviously you're seeing the shake of a person holding a camera, over 2 or 3 second or 4 or 5 second exposure, but they're actually using that compositionally. And the very last, before your shutter closes, the flash fires, and as that happens, whatever is there is captured. So you could actually have people walking in cars and someone could handhold a shot at 2 seconds and set for rear curtain sync, and they'll actually get a blur of people and the blur of the car's taillights, but right before the shutter closes, the flash fires, and then you're actually freezing the motion. But you have all of that captured on that one image. Let's say it's a half a second, 2 second, 3 second. Whether it's tripod mounted or whether it's handheld, you know, blur and jitters as far as the light present on your exposure is not a bad thing. I mean, if it's compositionally beautiful, then that's awesome. Some of the best street photography is done in New York and London and stuff that just amazing is someone has done handheld or tripod rear curtain sync, where you actually have the blur of the headlights or the blur of the illuminated bodies as being illuminated from street lamps or whatnot, but at the last fraction of a second right before the shutter closes, your flash fires, and so that is what rear curtain sync is used. It just has countless thousands of uses, but its main use is for conveying action and you know, expanding the drama and the compositional beauty of what your shot is by your understanding of light manipulation. Because you have to be thinking outside of what your eyeballs see, and you have to be thinking as far as what you can actually do, and not capturing the moments, as I've stated, but actually creating an image. Okay, your eyeballs see moments. Okay, boom, 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 boom. We see it as a seamless array of images. We don't think of terms of our eyeballs seeing snapshots, but it's just a seamless array like a film reel going off in our brains. But this is all we see. Boom, boom, boom. We're sampling at that rate, but you have to start thinking of your camera as a time machine rather than something to capture. Well, I see this. I want my camera to capture. Well, that's great. You know. Start creating images, and that's one of the really important and useful things that rear curtain sync is used for. Slave mode or remote mode, another great thing that's really neat about having at least one. I mean, I think I got like 16 speed lights, but only a half a dozen of those are, you know, advanced ones like this. Is that you can stand. It used to be called slave mode. We don't say slave mode anymore for obvious reasons, i.e. slavery. So it's the same thing. We've just called it remote mode. So remote mode, slave mode is the same thing. It's just kind of obviously we just don't want to use the word slave anymore for obvious reasons. So we can referring to it as remote mode. And what this means is that you're using your speed light for off-camera tethering to another light or another speed light, or you're actually using like your pop-up flash in commander mode. What you're doing is you're telling telling a remote speed light wirelessly to either act. Well, in the case of this advanced one, the SB910, it can actually act as a master, or it could actually act as a secondary unit. You can have multiple ones where this acts as the master for the others to fire at X number of exposures. And it's really simple. All you're doing is you're basically telling your speed light to be a minion for your camera, because as I've said, it's all about getting your speed light off of your camera. You know, get your flash off your camera, and you can use your pop-up flash in commander mode to tell this one to fire. And right now that I have it in remote mode, okay. Now that I have it in remote mode, you can see the two lights blinking here. That means it's waiting for a signal to receive an optical trip vis-a-vis this little window over here. It can actually work quite a distance away and not even be seen, because, you know, when you're talking about tripping one of these, it can actually see the stroboscopic light. Even if it's hidden behind a cushion like 30 yards away and the cushion is here, it can still see that light and fire it. So it's all about light placement. So people will take some of the most fascinating shots, and I've done a few, is take some speed lights like a person running, and I'll hang one in the tree, I'll fire it along the walkway, and I'll fire off a string of shots, and you'll get these fascinating pictures, and it's beautiful. What you can do with getting your speed light off of your camera is just nearly limitless as far as expanding your ability. A lot of people get bored with photography, and what they've done is they've not experimented with these, especially sticking them in remote mode off of their camera. Now, what does a speed light mean? I mean, it's just a simplex denotation. Well, its connotation is that a small a strobe unit. Of course, we don't call these strobes anymore. We call them speed lights. The denotation, the connotation has changed. Strobe is a huge beast now in connotation, and these are speed lights are ones that actually fit on the top of your hot shoe. Although I don't use them there, rarely I do. But it's referred to as strobe light that connect directly to your camera. It's generally referred to as an on-camera flash or on-camera strobe. But most people, it depends on where you're at. Some people actually call them strobes still in certain parts of the country. I mean, it depends on where you go, actually. It's like, where's my strobe? It's like, you mean your speed light? Yeah, I mean my strobe. I was like, okay. I've actually encountered that more than a few times myself, depending on who you're talking to and what part of the world. It's like, I don't know if Australians call them strobes or not. We call them speed lights up here, and we call those huge honkers over here outside the camera, call those strobes. So it depends on where you go. It really doesn't mean anything as far as other than you understand what it means. One of the last questions I had is, what do you mean by your flash becomes your shutter? And what I mean by that is that like 1/60th of a second or half a second shutter, you get the same image. You say you're doing a time exposure or a night shot. My image is dictated by my speed light, okay, not by my shutter and my camera. So realistically, we're talking about this becoming your real shutter. When you got little to no light present, you're doing photojournalistic work at night in a club, I can stick this thing in manual mode, okay, and I can actually induce effects. If there's like little lights coming, I can actually induce neat compositional effects by sticking this at 1/4 of a second or a 1/10 of a second. Shutter speed, so I'll actually get a little blur in there, but my shutter becomes ultimately whatever it is I'm shooting. My shutter becomes the speed of light. It becomes the strobe. It becomes, well, my speed light. I'm just referred to this as a strobe. Doesn't matter what you refer to it as long as you know what you're talking about. So when you got little to no light coming in a speed light, your speed light becomes your exposure and obviously supersedes the shutter in relevancy, because when I've got this thing in manual mode, doesn't matter if I've got the aperture the same. Obviously aperture affects everything regardless of what you got it set at as far as your depth of field, but once you're in a dark place or a club scene or time exposure or late night street photography, other than ambient dots of light that are pouring in, which can affect the image obviously due to shake and whatnot, your speed light becomes your shutter speed, and it becomes the speed of light. So you have to start manipulating with understanding, well, I can get the same exposure if I do 1/60th of a second shutter here, or if I do 1/10 of a second, or even 1 second. So if I experiment with that and I keep my light the same, and I'm TTL metering, what sort of effects am I getting? I mean, it doesn't take you that long to actually experiment around with that, so just do that. You shouldn't be afraid of your speed light. I mean, your speed light is not something to be feared. Let me get it out of repeating mode here, put it back on TTL. If you can actually just get a speed light that will actually do TTL metering, and then expand, just learn a new skill. You can learn a new skill every day. Just click on the mode button. Okay, what does guide number mean? What does manual mode mean? Well, okay, that means that, and I can use it for this, this, and that. Okay, that's neat, so I can apply it to this, this, and that. What does repeating mode mean? I use stroboscopic effect, and how could I use that? Oh, I can capture action. I can actually stick this camera on a tripod and catch a person running by and set my cycles, not that fast, but I can actually capture the same person in various little poses of running on one single exposure. And what you can do with that is just astounding. Like, you can catch a bee. One of the neat things some of the macro photography guys do is they'll actually take an insect that they know is flying towards a flower late at night. It's like they'll do insects, and they'll use stroboscopic effect, either handheld or monopod or tripod, and they'll actually capture you know, the bug flying into the light or into the flower. And so you've got various states of the wings flapping and the body moving, and it makes for beautiful imagery. And so stroboscopic effect is actually a lot of fun. It makes for beautiful composition, especially in macro photography. Really